What's up, everybody? Gajewski here, back again with the Stokastic Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Yes, Stokastic Osmo is undergoing a rebrand right now, but it is same everything, same personalities, same tools, so nothing to worry about there. Make sure to check out the new site. And today I am with my good friend Nick Lepri on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. We are going through the top 12 running backs. Huge topic today. I'm excited. Nick, how are you?
I am doing great today, and I am very excited to talk about this topic because while we have already talked about our running back rankings, a lot of things have changed since that last time. Now, no football has been played, right? Nothing has actually happened, but my opinion has definitely changed in a big way. So I'm very excited to talk about these running backs today.
Yeah, we'll keep going through this throughout the offseason too. We're nearing the 4th of July. That's kind of the hot spot, the start of the fantasy football season, if you will. And we'll dive into all that. We're going to go number 1 to number 12. And when we reference ADP today, it will be underdog fantasy rankings, just in case the ADP is a little different on your platform. That is what we are using. And finally, before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. All right. You ready to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, no surprise to anyone. We're going to go number 1 to number 12. And that is because there's a consensus at the top. It is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. And it's really hard to poke holes in him. Basically, nothing but good things to say. I think if you were trying to poke a hole, it's maybe that Nyheim Hines plays a little bit on passing downs. But even towards the end of the year last year, it was basically Jonathan Taylor's job. And I don't really see that changing after how efficient he was. He's in a very safe offense. He has shown the ability to catch passes, solid offensive line, and they got an upgrade with Matt Ryan. Just really hard for me to poke holes in him. But what do you think about Taylor?
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor is kind of the no-brainer number one running back. Now, in some drafts, people are going to take maybe Christian McCaffrey or some other running back over him, but I would think most people have Jonathan Taylor as the clear number one running back on every single website I've looked at. Their ADP, ESPN, NFL, Yahoo, Sleeper, Underdog, all of them have Jonathan Taylor as the number one player, as the number one running back, and it makes perfect sense, right? Last year, he is the number one running back in half PPR. He is number 2 in half PPR points per game because Derrick Henry was just so dominant for those 8 games he played. While Jonathan Taylor doesn't have some crazy receiving upside because Nyheim Hines is there, kind of like you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor is still a very safe running back. And like you said, with the upgrade of Matt Ryan, this team could be even better. And Jonathan Taylor could potentially put up even more points this season. So I love Jonathan Taylor this year. And I think there's really no holes to be poking in him, as I believe he is very safe.
I think the only thing you could maybe talk about in, I guess, fantasy football is, does he have the highest ceiling? And to me, he doesn't. The player that's actually second on our rankings, and we're doing consensus here between you and I. You have this player a little lower, but the number 2 player, Christian McCaffrey, I think does have a higher ceiling. For me, he is running back number 2. And if I were only doing one draft in fantasy football, I had one team to stake my life on, I would pick Christian McCaffrey because he has the higher ceiling due to his role in the offense. Now, Carolina is not a good offense at all. They don't have a great offensive line. And Christian McCaffrey has the injury prone tag. Again, I think that analysis is flawed. You've either been you've been in the league long enough to get injured, or you're just too young in the game at this point. So the injury prone moniker doesn't make a lot of sense to me with McCaffrey. Every player gets injured once they've played long enough. His role is absurd. He is legitimately one of maybe 3 running backs that has the chance to go for 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. The volume is going to be there regardless of who plays quarterback. It comes down to him staying healthy. And again, I'm not the one to project injuries. What do you think of McCaffrey?
Yeah, I like Christian McCaffrey a lot this year. I mean, a couple of years ago, Christian McCaffrey was the workhorse that was like not getting injured, right? He was playing every single game. There was a moniker that, oh, this guy just never gets hurt. And now the last 2 years, he's gotten banged up. So, things change, obviously. But at the end of the day, if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, he will be the number one running back in fantasy football. And there's no doubt in my mind about that. Like you said, he is one of the only running backs that gets this insane usage. He's going to be the highest used running back in the NFL if he plays every single game. This guy's unreal. It doesn't matter that Sam Darnold is absolutely atrocious. It doesn't matter that the Carolina Panthers are going to win maybe 4 games. It really doesn't matter at all because Christian McCaffrey is just so dominant. Me and you and the rest of the Stokastic team could be on the offensive line, and I'm sure Christian McCaffrey could still rush for over 1,000 yards on the season. He is just that good. So I think Christian McCaffrey is going to dominate this year. And if he stays healthy, like you said, his floor is super safe and his ceiling is just insane, right? He could easily put up maybe 5 points per game more than the second running back behind him.
Yeah, and I think you can rationalize away some of the concerns. Injury, again, that's not one that we can predict. And then you look at the overall offense. Running backs on bad offenses produce all the time. Look at Cordell Patterson last year. James Robinson is kind of the staple example of this. When you look at that Jacksonville Jaguars team, he ended up dominating opportunities. It is opportunity that matters more than anything else. And Christian McCaffrey gets it when he's healthy. So I think due to ceiling, he's somebody that you should be considering in the top three backs. But let's go to our running back number 3 in the consensus between my rankings and your rankings. It is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. Now is where you can start poking holes in some of the backs. Again, McCaffrey, it's just injury. But with Henry, there is a little bit of a role concern. He's a player that's never really caught passes. Now, last year, he was on track for a career high, basically, in usage in the pass game. He averages 2.5 targets per game, if that is going to move forward. But Henry's an aging player. He's going to be 28 when the season starts, and his efficiency is starting to decline. His yards after contact per attempt have declined in 4 straight years, as has his forced missed tackles per attempt. So this is a slight concern for me, but also the volume's not going anywhere. Derrick Henry is going to receive a monstrous workload when he's healthy with this team. Last year, again, 27.4 carries, 2.5 targets. The red zone role is incredible. So even with the declining efficiency, it's really hard for me to rank Henry outside the top 5, and he's firmly a top 5 player for me. But what do you think of him?
Yeah, I think some people are a little nervous about Derrick Henry because of the injury last year. They're thinking there's too much tread on the tires, that this guy's just running the ball way too much. And then some people will also poke the other hole, which is that A.J. Brown is now gone. I understand they have Robert Woods, they have Treylon Burks, but some people will make the argument that A.J. Brown is such a talented player that maybe this is going to hurt Ryan Tannehill even further. And then the Tennessee Titans as a whole offensively will not be as strong. In my opinion, I think Derrick Henry is going to be just fine. I understand that he is a little bit older. He's getting up there in age, but I haven't really seen the edge for Derrick Henry, right? I haven't seen the point where I believe the full decline is going to happen. Eventually, it's going to happen. Eventually, one of these years, we're going to draft Derrick Henry in the top 10, and he's probably going to be atrocious, but I don't think that is going to be this year. I think he still has it in him, and I think we could easily see Derrick Henry eclipse 440 plus carries next season. He was on pace to do that last year. He had 27.4 carries per game. I understand he doesn't really have that receiving upside, but at the end of the day, with just so much carries, the whole offense runs through him. He runs through the defense. To me, it's a no-brainer to have him ranked as a top 5 back.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still nothing behind him. We're talking about Dontrell Hilliard, who actually did play well when he was forced into action last year. And then they spent a 4th-round pick on Hassan Haskins. That's not any draft capital where you'd be worried about Henry splitting work. So for me, still very clearly one of the safest backs in fantasy football drafts. Heading to number 4, I think this is where the rankings can start to diverge a little bit. Our consensus over at Stokastic has Austin Ekeler of the Los Angeles Chargers really high. And I think the ceiling is clear. He operates in that sort of Christian McCaffrey light role. He won't get as many carries, but the receiving role for him is certainly there. And those are kind of the money targets, the money opportunity, if you will, for fantasy football running backs. You want them catching passes. And last year, he averaged 5.9 targets per game, 12.9 carries. And this year, I think you could even see even more. But more importantly, he's on the Los Angeles Chargers, who are going to be among the most explosive offenses in the NFL. Last year, they were 5th in plays per game. They were 4th in pass rated neutral game scripts. There's a lot to like about Ekeler. He's a little higher on your board than mine, so tell me about him.
Yeah, I have him ranked as my running back 2. I have no discrepancy, no anger towards you, right, for having him as running back number 4 in the consensus, right? It's okay.
I
I
have him
understand.
6.
You have him at 6. Yeah, I understand that. Austin Ekeler is, to me, one of the best running backs in the NFL. He is another one of those guys like Christian McCaffrey that it would not surprise me if he got 1,000 rushing yards as well as 1,000 receiving yards. Last year, he had 911 rushing yards, which was 12th at running back, 647 receiving yards, 1st at running back. Austin Ekeler, there's really no injury concerns with him. But again, like you said, maybe he just hasn't been playing long enough to really get injured. So Austin Ekeler is linked to one of the best offenses in the NFL, an offense that might end up being the best offense as a whole in terms of yards in the National Football League. Austin Ekeler has a very clear role in this offense. I understand they do draft a running back behind Austin Ekeler, but Austin Ekeler isn't one of those guys that needs a shit ton of carries, right? He's only getting 12.9 per game. He doesn't need to have 15, 16 carries a game in order to be dominant because of those targets, because of the receptions, 4.4 receptions per game. I think he's going to be just fine, even if he gets a slightly reduced role in 2022. I still think Austin Ekeler and this Chargers offense is just so good that he's bound to be super good this season as a top 5 back. Again, I got him running back too. I'm pretty confident that he will finish inside the top 5, and I am perfectly fine taking him number 2 overall ahead of Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I'm not. He just doesn't have that opportunity, and he won't even be close if they both stay healthy. And I'm not drafting based on injuries. Like Austin Ekeler, the 13 carries the average per game and 6 targets. Even if you want to go a little lower and look at a guy like Najee Harris averaged 5.5 targets per game and 18 carries. We know volume is the most predictive analytic when looking at running backs moving forward. So just based on a pure volume perspective, Austin Ekeler, he can still be a top 5 running back, I think. But unless there's injuries to all these guys ahead of him, he just doesn't really have a strong, I guess, case to finish as the RB1 or a top 3 running back. Again, that's going to be injury related. But overall, I think he's pretty safe based on those volume metrics. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we're good on Ekeler.
All right, we'll go to RB5 now. It is Dalvin Cook. We actually had a tie in our consensus rankings between 5 and 6, so it is razor thin. Just put Dalvin Cook ahead for the purposes of this video. He's the longtime Minnesota Vikings bell cow back, getting a little up there in age, but his volume has been spectacular too. And that's part of the reason why I don't have Ekeler in the top 5 is you get Dalvin Cook, who averaged 19.2 targets per game, carries per game, and then 4 targets per game. So the volume is just so much better for a player like Dalvin Cook. He's on an offense, which I think is middling. Last year, they were 13th in plays per game, 13th in pass rate and neutral game scripts. They bring in the entirely new coaching staff. So we'll see if that changes at all. But really, it comes down to his role. We're not going to see Alexander Mattison function into this backfield outside of maybe a couple change of pace carries or targets here and there. And when you look at Cook, he is a player who's been very efficient throughout his career, forcing missed tackles, yards after contact per attempt. So he's a player I think that is very safe. And I've heard that this is a funny argument. I've heard if you just want the safest approach to your redraft leagues, like you just want a safe RB1, you should draft Dalvin Cook number 1 overall and reach on Alexander Mattison just to get that bell cow right behind him, which I don't think is a crazy strategy. But what do you think about Dalvin Cook?
Yeah, I don't think that's that crazy either. I also saw that tweet on Twitter. I thought that was funny. That's
kind of interesting. Like when you look at Taylor, he doesn't have a clear handcuff. McCaffrey doesn't have a clear handcuff. Henry doesn't. Ekeler doesn't. If you just want the surefire 20 touch per game guy, like Dalvin Cook's the first one that has it.
Yeah, definitely. So Dalvin Cook, the interesting spot or the interesting part about him is that maybe this year with the changes at the coaching positions on the team, maybe they do look to pass the ball a little bit more. That is probably my biggest worry for Dalvin Cook. Dalvin
Isn't that
Cook
good though? Doesn't that mean more targets?
It should, right? He had 49 targets last year. He is no Christian McCaffrey going to see a million targets, but he's probably going to be in that 60 target range, I would say, in 2022. My biggest knock against him, again, you always talk about how you can't predict injuries. I think with Dalvin Cook, you can predict injuries. He misses games every single year. Again, I'm no fucking doctor, so what do I know? But when you look at the statistics, he misses every single year, and that is my biggest knock against him. He is so good that it makes sense that he could be a top 5 running back. It makes sense that he could be maybe even the number 1 running back if he plays 17 games. But I definitely am someone that is slightly concerned with the injury. But like you said, if you just package him in with Alexander Mattison later, I understand Alexander Mattison is going to burn a hole in your bench for weeks on the season. But when he does eventually come in for Dalvin Cook, if Cook was to get hurt, you have a legitimate running back 1 in Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison together.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, a lot of these running backs get hurt. When you look at games played, I mean, he's played 13, 14, 14, and 11 in the last 4 seasons. So we're splitting hairs here. And like Derrick Henry missed 8 games. I mean, these injuries happen to people, and it's not random, but it's pretty darn close. So again, not drafting based on injuries at all. But let's go to RB number 6. It is Najee Harris. For me, he is RB number 5, and it's just basically the role is ridiculous for this player, and it's not changing. They spent the first round draft capital on Harris. Wasn't efficient But when you look at his role, he averaged 18 carries per game, 5.5 targets. And that's definitely not changing with a rookie quarterback or Mitch Trubisky, whoever they want to start. So there's just so much raw opportunity value with Harris. I think it's really hard to rank him outside the top 5.
Yeah, I agree with you. I believe, him ranked as my running back number 5. Yeah, Najee Harris is running back number 5. I like Najee Harris a ton. Obviously, like you just talked about, there is the quarterback situation that could be concerning because last year it seems like I almost said Rob Gronkowski, Big Ben Roethlisberger literally had no idea how to throw the football to anyone not named Deontay Johnson or Najee Harris. Every time he threw it to Najee Harris, it was like a vintage throw from him, right? A perfect spiral. And then he'd throw the ball to Chase Claypool and he'd have no idea where he was in the universe. But at the end of the day, I think Najee Harris is going to be in a situation where he sees a lot of targets just like last year. He was number 1 in targets at the running back position, number 1 in receptions, number 3 in receiving yards. He was only ranking 8th in the touchdown category. I think the Steelers will be a little bit better with Trubisky or Kenny Pickett this year, depending who they want to roll with. Right now, the news is that Pickett has been working exclusively with the third team. So that kind of tells me that Trubisky is going to start for at least the first 4, 5, 6 games of the season. I think Najee Harris here, even with the revolving door at the quarterback position, with how many touches he sees on a per game basis, should be very safe. And even if the Steelers maybe are worse than with Big Ben, which I would see kind of hard to believe, even if that is the case, I still think Najee Harris puts up solid numbers this year.
Yeah, I do too. Again, it's just volume. When you look at him as a player, he's actually not good. So it's funny that Pittsburgh spent a first round pick on a player who's just this bad. He was 44th in yards per reception at the running back position among all running backs that had 25 targets. He was 22nd among all running backs with 100 carries and yards after contact per attempt. So definitely not an efficient running back. You could find replacement like Deontay Foreman's ahead of him, Devin Singletary's ahead of him, Michael Carter's ahead of him, so Elijah Mitchell's ahead of him, Dearness Johnson. Like, you're finding guys literally walking around on the street that are averaging more yards after contact and more yards per reception than Najee Harris. So just a laughable pick. But ultimately, you cannot knock the volume that he is going to receive, regardless of what we think. Pittsburgh thinks he's good, and they're going to give him the ball. But let's move on to our RB7. It is Joe Mixon. I'm starting to get some concerns with Joe Mixon. There's all this rumors and rumblings coming out of Cincinnati that, Chris Evans might supplant Samaje Perine as the pass down back. And that doesn't mean anything really for Mixon. But the concern is, like, one of these guys is going to be the pass down back if Joe Mixon is locked into an early down, 2-down grinder role, which we did see towards the end of last year. That's not good for fantasy football. And if that is the case, he should probably be outside the top 10. It's just this offense is explosive. He averaged 18.3 carries per game and 3.0 targets. Again, if those target numbers come down, you're looking at like a significantly worse version of Derrick Henry, and that's not someone I want to draft. So Mixon's a little bit of a hot button topic for me right now.
Yeah, I can understand those concerns with Mixon, right? Because any of these running backs, right? Most of them, so much of their value comes from the receptions. We're talking about on Underdog, it's half PPR. Most fantasy football leagues are either full PPR or half PPR at this point, unless you play in the fucking Stone Age with Fred Flintstone in your league's a standard league. So I think that Joe Mixon's value is going to dip if he sees a reduction in targets. I'm not too sure it's a lock for that to happen yet. So that's why I haven't moved Joe Mixon too much in my rankings. I think the upgraded offensive line is going to help him out a ton. He has played with not so hot offensive lines throughout his whole NFL career. He really never put it all together. He had flashes of games over the past where he looked good, but he never really put together a solid season until last year. It was the running back 3.5 PPR, running back 4.5 PPR points per game. This is a Cincinnati team that I want to have my players linked to. I really think that while they're probably not going to make the Super Bowl again, they're still going to be one of the better teams, at least offensively. And I expect with the upgraded offensive line, Joe Mixon to put up even better numbers in terms of efficiency compared to last year. Again, though, if the targets do drop, that is very concerning for any player, and it will be very concerning for Joe Mixon.
It's like through every point in his career, they've been searching for a pass catching back to complement him. And it's really interesting because they use the high draft cap on him. They pay him all this money. And he's a player that caught passes in college, and he's shown the ability to, when given opportunity. Why are they constantly searching for pass catchers? And, maybe it's just the fact that they wrote him for 18.3 carries per game. You really don't want your players in that Christian McCaffrey role unless they have to. It's part of the reason why McCaffrey gets injured so often. Injuries are linked to opportunity. So with Mixon, that could be just a little bit of a concern too. But ultimately, he's still my RB7. He's still RB7 on Underdog. And I think I'm going to be in line with the field based on what you said. The offense is explosive. Offensive line is improved. And we just want pieces of that. But speaking of Underdog, we've been referencing their ADP throughout the show. They're the best place to play fantasy football in the summer months. They just unveiled Best Ball Mania 3, which is a tournament that has a $10 million prize pool. All you have to do is draft your team. That's it. There's no waivers, no trades, no in-season management. Underdog just gives you the best score every single week, and then the highest score at the end of the year wins. Last year's Best Ball Mania championship team was drafted in June, so there's no time to wait. Also, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100 when you use the promo code AWESEMO. That's good for 4 entries into the Best Ball Mania 3. All you have to do is head to underdogfantasy.com, look them up in the App Store, or even just click the link in the video description below. Then use that promo code. Again, it is AWESEMO. Get yourself $100 free. All right, let's move to RB number 8. It is Aaron Jones. Again, this is the consensus ranking. You and I have had a lot of spirited debates about Aaron Jones versus DeAndre Swift this offseason. So I'll kind of lay out the bull case for him here. He's already an excellent pass catching back. I think he sort of has the Austin Ekeler role in the Green Bay offense, especially with Davante Adams exiting the system. I think you see the targets rise for Aaron Jones, and last year he was averaging 4.3 per game. There's an argument that he's just the best pass catcher on this team right now. He will be splitting time with A.J. Dillon, which is a concern, and it could be more of a 50-50 split than people are believing right now. But ultimately, this Green Bay team has a huge win total. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. Aaron Jones actually still out-touched A.J. Dillon in the red zone when you look at targets and carries combined. So he's a player for me that is still ranked really high, and he's one of the reasons I'm considering moving Joe Mixon down. Just the target floor for Aaron Jones is going to be so high this year. What do you think of him?
Yeah, ever since we talked last time, I actually moved Aaron Jones up slightly. I think he was closer to running back 12 for me initially. Now he is my running back number 9. So I did definitely give him a slight bump. I think that Aaron Jones, like you said, is just in an opportunity where he could legitimately be the second highest targeted player on the team behind whichever wide receiver it ends up being. I think that A.J. Dillon is somewhat of a concern, but people keep trying to talk themselves into A.J. Dillon when in reality, A.J. Dillon isn't going to steal anything in terms of targets. It's all about the rushing opportunities that he could steal as well as the touchdowns, right? If they get on the goal line, they might hand the ball to A.J. Dillon because that dude looks like a fucking wrecking ball, right? He's built like that. He can just run through the offensive line, run through the defensive line, and get into the end zone, right? He is a talented player, right? I'm not trying to make fun of A.J. Dillon, right? But at the end of the day, Aaron Jones is the clear number 1 there. I think the Green Bay offense as a whole is going to be slightly regressed compared to with Davante Adams because it's hard to keep up that same great offense, right? When you lose this great red zone weapon, this guy that Aaron Rodgers trusts everywhere, right? You throw the ball anywhere near Davante Adams, he's going to catch it. So the offense is going to definitely be worse this season. But at the end of the day, I think Aaron Jones could be a benefactor from that, like you said, because he might just see a crazy increase in targets from Aaron Rodgers. So I basically completely agree with what you were saying the whole time. And just like you said, the only thing that could potentially screw Aaron Jones out of maybe hitting his ceiling as a top 5 running back would be A.J. Dillon coming in and stealing a lot more touches. But again, I don't think either of us really believe that is going to happen.
Yeah, I think his role will be mainly on early downs, short yardage situations, which makes sense given his size. But you do raise valid concerns. This team addressed defense really hard in the NFL draft, and they've done so a lot in current seasons. Last year, they were 18th in plays per game. You could see that regress a little bit negatively. Their pass rate was 17th overall, but played in a ton of positive game scripts. When you look at their pass rate in neutral game scripts, it was 8th. I still think that probably regresses given they didn't really address receiver too much outside of an FCS prospect on day 2 of the NFL draft. But ultimately, Aaron Jones, I think the efficiency is there. The opportunity should be there too. When you look at yards after contact per attempt, he was 12th among all running backs with 100 carries. Yards per route run, he was 13th among all running backs that were targeted 25 times. All right, RB number 9. It is James Conner. This is a player that's been soaring up my rankings. And to put this simply, they lost Chase Edmonds and they haven't replaced you haven't replaced Edmonds with anyone of consequence. You bring in Darrell Williams. He's not even working as the RB2 right now. All reports coming out of minicamp are that Eno Benjamin is the RB2. Again, that is unsettled, and that is what the reports have also indicated. But seeing Darrell Williams behind Eno Benjamin, like Jonathan Ward is still there. All this to say, James Conner has nothing behind him in terms of a change of pace. Last year, he averaged 2.5 targets per game, 13.5 carries per game. But when Chase Edmonds went out, his opportunity soared. And you saw this guy above 5 targets numerous times. efficient as a pass catcher as well. I think that's a big knock against him, but he was 10th in yards per route run among all running backs that had 25 targets last year. Just phenomenal opportunity for James Conner. And if he's going to be locked into this bell cow role, I think he should probably be RB7, and he might end up there for me at the end of, or I guess I should say the start of fantasy season. What do you think of Conner?
Yeah, I think I've always been kind of in the James Conner bandwagon because Chase Edmonds is gone. And now without DeAndre Hopkins for the start of the season, I think that could see an even bigger increased target share early on for James Conner inside of this offense. I just really think that he's a really talented running back. We saw it in Pittsburgh when he wasn't hurt. We saw it last year in Arizona. And this is going to be an offense that probably will choke in the playoffs, right? They did last year because Kyler Murray is a mental midget and he is a real midget as well. He's pretty short. But at the end of the day, in the regular season, that's all we're talking about for fantasy football, the real season. And James Conner is going to dominate. This offense is going to dominate. And I really see James Conner being one of the better running backs in all of fantasy football. He is the clear number one running back. And like you said, the worry about maybe Benjamin being the number 2 running back. To me, I don't really care who the number 2 running back is, but that news also helps us out because now it's like, wow, they're pretty unsure about who the number 2 is. Maybe that pushes James Conner even further. Again, this is going to be one of the better offenses, in my opinion, in the NFL. And then when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, maybe that actually helps out James Conner because they're just going to be better on offense, getting more red zone opportunities for James Conner. He scored 18 total touchdowns last year, third at running back. Based upon the amount of opportunities he got, that's a little crazy, but I think this year he sees more chances and could score around 18 touchdowns again. I think he'll be closer to like 16, but should still finish as a top 10 back.
16 touchdowns. I'd be still extremely happy with that. But to your point, yeah, the Benjamin news, it doesn't like scare me off Conner or anything. All it really suggests to me is that Darrell Williams hasn't come in and really solidified himself as that RB2. And if no one is beating out Benjamin, like the talent gap between Conner and these backups is very wide. So I think they will ride him as much as they possibly can, like they did without Edmonds last year. RB10 is DeAndre Swift. So similar to you being convinced to bring up Aaron Jones in your rankings, you have likewise convinced me to raise up DeAndre Swift. He's still a player I have concerns with. It comes down to volume. Jamal Williams is still there, and all reports out of minicamp suggest that Jamal Williams is still very much involved. So that is a concern for me. And then Swift is just not very good. He was 47th in yards after contact per attempt last year among all running backs that had 100 carries. When you look at yards per route run, he was 19th among running backs that had 25 targets. So, I mean, like that could regress positively, but I mean, already playing behind a good offensive line, when you're not really generating yards after contact or yards per route run, that doesn't suggest to me he's deserving of more opportunity over Jamal Williams. Again, I'm not the coach, so we'll see how this plans out. But overall, it's still a team that is projected for around 6 wins, depending on the book you're looking at. They're not going to be very good. They're going to be playing from behind a lot. It's just really hard for me to rank them over Aaron Jones, who I think is playing like almost an identical role. James Conner is significantly better volume. I can't really get higher than number 10 for DeAndre Swift. So sell me on this player.
Yeah, for me, it's all about the receiving upside for DeAndre Swift last year, averaging 6 targets per game. I wouldn't even be surprised if he got closer to 7 this year. He played in 13 games. He was the running back 13 and a half PPR points per game, finished as running back 19 on the season. Pretty hard to finish as a top 12 back, though, when you only play in 13 games, unless you're Derrick Henry, because Derrick Henry probably would have been a top 5 running back if he played like 13 games last season because of how good he was when he was healthy. But DeAndre Swift, I understand he's on the Lions. I understand Jared Goff is his fucking quarterback, so things could be a lot better. But at the end of the day, I think this Lions team is going to be slightly better. They have an upgraded offensive line. The wide receiver core is pretty solid there. Now, with the fact that Amon-Ra St. Brown's locked in, they bring in DJ Chark, they draft Jameson Williams. I am pretty confident that the Detroit team will be much better than they were last season. And I think as a whole, DeAndre Swift is still the number 1 running back there. Jamal Williams will come in, steal some carries, definitely, right? DeAndre Swift only averaged 11.6 carries per game, but why I want DeAndre Swift is not because of the fact that I think he's going to see 300 carries. It's because I believe he could see 100 plus targets. I believe he could get maybe 70, 80 receptions, and that receiving total just carry him. I believe this team is going to be feeding DeAndre Swift the ball. So I'm pretty confident in him this year, mostly just because of the receiving volume. Again, I don't really see his carries getting much higher because Jamal Williams is there. And that is the biggest knock against DeAndre Swift, is that he is not the clear workhorse running back in this offense. Kind of like how you can make the argument against Austin Ekeler, but Austin Ekeler is much more ingrained in his offense compared to DeAndre Swift. So DeAndre Swift's kind of like Austin Eckler light.
Yeah,
Diet
Eckler in a
Austin
much better offense too. But again, that's why they're so different, and they're very Eckler's 4 and Swift is 10 in our rankings. But ultimately, everything you laid out is why I had to raise Swift up in my rankings. He is going to see a lot of pass game work, and that is extremely valuable. We know Jared Goff has a preference towards checking down. Jameson Williams might not play the first half of the year, so he's going to be an explosive addition to the offense, but when does he actually get on the field? By necessity, they might just have to use DeAndre Swift a little more. And I do like what they have up front. They have a very solid offense. I think they'll be trailing, which could actually help DeAndre Swift, maybe not with touchdowns, but with targets. So ultimately, he is a back on the rise for me, and he may continue to do so. A lot of it is going to depend on our next player, Alvin Kamara. What happens with the 6-game suspension or whatever it's going to be? I'm kind of throwing my hands up at this point because early in the offseason, we heard that maybe this gets deferred to the next season. Now we're hearing that Kamara's camp is bracing for a 6-game suspension. There's just uncertainty here, which is why he comes in outside the top 10 in my personal rankings. I'm still having trouble ranking him outside the top 12 because when he's healthy, he's going to have a monstrous workload. And a lot of that's going to come in the receiving game, as we've seen for years now. So it's kind of the same argument with Ekeler and Jones and Swift. We like the way he's used, but man, this uncertainty right now is a little bit concerning with Kamara. What do you think of him?
Yeah, I had to move Kamara down after hearing about the 6-game suspension. Now, again, this is not definite. Like you said, the team, Alvin Kamara himself and his team are bracing for a 6-game suspension. Who knows what's going to actually happen, right? Because they say it's going to be 6 games. Then they go and talk to Roger Goodell or whoever the fuck they have to talk to. And then magically it's 3 games or it's 4 games. And like you said, Alvin Kamara is just so good that I feel like you almost have to still draft him if this is a 4 or 5-game suspension relatively high because of the fact that you can just draft Alvin Kamara and then just have someone else sit in his spot, right? Even if it's going to be Mark Ingram. If you think Mark Ingram is going to be the guy, then draft Mark Ingram as well. You just play Mark Ingram for the first couple of games. I understand Mark Ingram isn't like Alexander Madison, so it's not like with Alexander Madison and Dalvin Cook, but he's all right. He'll be good enough. And then once Alvin Kamara comes in, you just throw him back in your lineup and bam, this is something that I did a couple of years ago, probably. This is like 8 years ago at this point, right? When Le'Veon Bell got suspended for smoking some weed, he got suspended. So you could play D'Angelo Williams for the first couple of games. And I still drafted Le'Veon Bell inside the top 5. Le'Veon Bell comes back. He's amazing. It's fine. So with Alvin Kamara, again, if he's suspended 6 games, I'm going to have to drop him even further because missing 6 games is a lot. It's just like DeAndre Hopkins falling drastically down the board. But Alvin Kamara is just so fucking good. And the running back position, guys like Alvin Kamara don't just come off a tree, right? They're very hard to find. So if Alvin Kamara gets the full 6 games, I'm still going to want to draft him, but I'm going to be significantly more nervous doing it depending on where his ADP ends up at the end of August. Because right now, there's really no sign of when he will actually be suspended.
Right. And you laid out a great strategy. Attack Mark Ingram, attack some of these late round running backs that have at least a role locked in, whether it's change of pace or not. You at least want to fill that spot with some opportunity in the meantime. And shout out Le'Veon Bell fighting Adrian Peterson in an exhibition boxing match. Cannot wait for that. All right, let's get to our last player in the top 12. It is Saquon Barkley. I do have concerns with Barkley, but we've seen the ceiling. It's right up there with Christian McCaffrey. He was a consensus top 2 back a few years ago alongside McCaffrey. And it's kind of been the same issue. Injuries have derailed his career. He's still an extremely young player, 26, if I'm not mistaken. He's on a Giants team that changed head coaches. I like Brian Daboll coming in. They've tried to address the offensive line. I still think they're going to go through their lumps, but it is better than last year. So Barkley should be behind a better offensive line. The concern for me is that they used Devontae Booker as a change of pace back last year, and this could have been injury related. Saquon Barkley did sprain his ankle in week 5. Not enough to really limit him game-wise. Like, he didn't miss a lot of time, but he was limited in terms of playing time. So to me, it comes down to the question of, was it Barkley's efficiency and was it his talent that has now been diminished because of injuries? Or was it he was just really affected by the ankle sprain and that's why they got Booker so involved? Ultimately, where we have him at RB12, I'm still willing to take a bet on him returning to that player we saw in the first couple of years coming out of Penn State. Excellent pass catcher, but there's still concerns there. What do you think of Barkley here?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw those pictures that Saquon Barkley put on Instagram of him without
jacked.
a shirt on. Dude is huge. It's crazy how good he looks considering of how many injuries he has sustained over the last couple of years. I think a lot of the blame you could put potentially on why Saquon Barkley hasn't been that great is on Joe Judge. Joe Judge is a certified idiot. We have seen that over the last season and over the last couple of seasons. He is not very good at all. My running back number 12, Leonard Fournette. These are basically polar opposite guys, right? Saquon Barkley is built like a Greek god, and we saw Leonard Fournette come into camp looking like fucking Eddie Lacy in his prime. So it isn't very good for Leonard Fournette. But Saquon Barkley, at the end of the day, is very good if he's healthy. It's the same argument you can make about Christian McCaffrey. These are two of the best running backs in the NFL that have dealt with injury-riddled seasons over the last couple of years. Again, I think this offense is going to be significantly better with Brian Daboll. This is basically Daniel Jones's last chance. If Daniel Jones is done here, then he's probably cooking burgers at McDonald's for the next couple of years because he's probably done as the starting quarterback in New York. He'll probably have a backup role, right? He's not going to have to go straight to McDonald's. But at the end of the day, I think Saquon Barkley is good enough to warrant being a top 12 running back. And I just hope that he returns to this form because it sucked the last couple of years having Saquon Barkley just not be that explosive. You remember a couple of years ago when he hurtled over I think it was the Bears, and how crazy that was? We haven't seen that in years. So I hope that he does return to form.
Yeah, me too. Again, it's largely been the injury bug. So hopefully he can avoid that this year. And to your point on Fournette, I have him as my RB13. So if we were extending this list, I think Fournette would be right there in play for us. But any last words on the running back position inside the top 12? Of course, we'll have videos addressing all these players outside the top 12 as well. So make sure to check that out. But again, any last words, Nick?
Yeah, my last word here would be that I hope you guys did end up enjoying today's video. And let us know down below in the comments section if we didn't have anyone inside of me and Matt's consensus top 12 that you think should be a top 12 running back, because it makes for good discussion in the comment section. I always try to read all of the comments. Sometimes I do forget to reply, but if you do leave a comment, I will at least have read your comment. So please make sure to leave comments. Please make sure you check out Underdog again. Promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for the $100 first match deposit bonus. And thank you, Matt, for joining me today. I had a great time.
Me too, and well said. He is on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy on the screen where you can see Nick Lepri, of course. I am on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you again next.